Hey there, this is Callum again from Make, and now we're going to walk through how you can do a similar reporting onto a Google Sheet using the Make API. So on the screen here, we have the Make API documentation, and on the left-hand side here, you have the navigation where you can go into scenarios, and you'll see this endpoint list scenarios. So this is the first one that we're going to use, and you can see that you can query based off of the team ID, organization ID, and you can also go based off of the folder ID, which is what I'm going to show to limit the amount of scenarios that we're going to go through. Once you have all of the scenarios with their IDs, then there's another endpoint in the logs that is list scenario logs. So from here, the only required parameter is the scenario ID, which we'll be able to map in from the previous call. And then we can put in the from parameter of when the last time that you maybe polled was so that you can get all of the errors since then. There is a max of 50 that you can poll, so you'll have to think about that in terms of how often you'll have this run. And then you can filter by the status as well. So the status by numbers, success, warning, and error is 1, 2, 3. The nice thing that we have here is it's great to be familiar with the Make API to see some of the things that you can do, but there is a Make app as well. And with the Make app, we do have these API endpoints already built out. So if you go, I'm going to first show the Make app. You can click into the Make app here and see the different endpoints with the different categories. So with scenario, you see the list scenarios, and also the scenario logs, list scenario logs. But there's tons of endpoints that you can use here to kind of run your own Make instance using the Make app. In addition to that, if you don't see the action, you can go to the Make an API call to access additional endpoints. Okay, so let's dive into the scenario. So just like the other one, it is pre-built, but we will dive into each module to show you how each one is configured. So just like I showed on the API documentation, these are the first two calls. First, list scenarios, and then the list scenario logs. So I'm going to go ahead and unlink this route here and open up the list scenarios. So you'll see that here you can filter by those query parameters, Kellen's organization, that is the organization. You can map it over to the ID, or you can select the drop downs as well. So I have the organization, my organization, the team is Make, and then within the folder of error handling. Then for the only active scenarios, I would likely recommend empty here because if you do have a scenario that gets deactivated due to an error, you want that to be pulled in as well. Then with the limit, you can put this to whatever you would like. I would recommend putting more than the amount of scenarios that you have within your organization or team or within the folder that you are watching. So then once you list the scenarios specifically, then you can list the scenario logs. And here we can just map the scenario ID that we receive from listing the scenarios. And then this is that from query parameter. In this example, I'm going to poll within the last 2 hours, but you can keep this open and you can also put it to anything specific to you. But again, I'd recommend basing this on the last time you ran the scenario. The other piece that we want to notice is the status. So for me, I am just polling the status error, but you can also do the status warning, for example, if you want to get ahead of any sort of errors that could be occurring in the future. The show check runs I have as no. That's basically every time that Make within the scenario here, if it's a listing scenario, this is a check. If it doesn't result anything, then it'll include that. I don't think that it's necessary, so we can just keep that as no. And then the max is 50, so that's what I put it at here today. So if I go ahead and run this scenario, you'll see that it is listing the scenarios within that folder. So there are 5. And then we have 5 operations here. So then it goes and cycles through each of those scenarios and sees if there are any errors within the scenarios. So we see there's total number of bundles is 0 for the first 2. And then the third one, we have the error that I produced earlier. So then I'm going to reattach this, and you'll notice that we have a filter here. And this is basically just saying it has to find an error in order for it to pass to my text aggregator. And these two pieces work together. So I'm going to show the Google Sheets Make an API call first so that we can see exactly what's going on here. So you could just do a Google Sheets add a row. This is the batch API where you can add multiple rows to a Google Sheet with just one operation. So here we have the relative URL /spreadsheets, and you have the spreadsheet ID /values, and then you have the sheet name. Here you append at A1, and you have :append. Doing method post, this is automatically generated for you. And then for the query string, we just need value input option user entered. And this is where we're going to actually push the information into the Google Sheet. So we have the range, the major dimension of rows, and then we have values in brackets, where then we have the aggregated text, which the aggregated text comes from the text aggregator, which I will reveal in a second. And this will basically be constructing all of the different rows within the values array here. So if I go into the text aggregator, I'm going to expand this. We have a similar structure here where we have the brackets on both sides, and every single column for the row is separated by a comma, and it is surrounded by quotes. So if I look at the error logging report API sheet, these are the columns. So they're a little bit different than the report via the make email because we get different data. So you'll notice that we have the organization, the name, the team ID, and then here we have a hyperlink of the scenario logs. So we're actually able to construct the scenario logs URL so that we can drill directly into that exact execution ID, which I'll show you in a second here. If I go ahead and now run the full scenario, we'll see that 2 made it through, so that we have this aggregated text here. And we made the call, and so then on the reporting sheet, we have the error producing, same error as before, similar information, but you'll notice here that when you click into the logs, as I mentioned before, this brings you right into the exact execution that had occurred. Which, if we go back to the other error logging sheet from the make emails, and we go to that error producing log, you'll notice that it brings us to the logs page for the scenario. So you'll notice in the URL, it's for this scenario and in the logs. So it brings you to the general logs page, but it doesn't actually bring you to the exact execution, which is definitely a highlight of the Make API. If we compare the two even further, say the main differences there are what I had just mentioned. We're getting it directly into the log of that specific execution, but also the error details. So within the make emails, you'll notice that we have some details of why the error happened or what could have happened. Whereas in the API, we don't get that amount of detail. We just have the type as error. But again, we can go right into the direct log and see exactly what happened there. So here you can see the 400 bad requests. And one last piece to point out in terms of the differentiation between the two approaches is the operations that are consumed. So you'll notice here that with the Make API, it will use 8 operations when we are cycling through 5 scenarios. So this list is always 1, no matter how many scenarios it returns. And this list logs is however many scenarios that you have. And then these will always be 1 and 2 operations. So it's essentially however many scenarios that you have that you're watching plus 3. Now, the make emails, where we are processing these, every single time that there's an error or a warning, it's going to consume 9 operations. So this one could end up using more operations in the long term because each individual error is processing independently and using up 9 operations.